This is Show Up as a Leader, a show from PeopleForward Network, helping you maximize your positive impact on the world by becoming your best, fully authentic self. Hey everyone, it is Rosie. I just love the timeliness and universalness of this conversation that I had with such an incredible human and incredible leader. I am talking about Andrew Adeniyi, and he is a first-generation Nigerian American and CEO and founder of AAA Solutions. They are a consulting firm that provides workplace culture consulting and training services. Speaking my love language, he's got a couple amazing books out, and we dig into so many universal things around formal leadership, informal leadership. What does it mean to have effective teams? He talks about a really simple 3P framework for culture that is like, you're kind of like, well, duh, but it's just stuff we get away from. And a lot of the things we talk about in this conversation are not necessarily new things. It's reminders of how critical the simple practices are that we can just get away from because we have this need to, over complexify things, or we get stuck in a rabbit hole of to-do lists and we forget about the critical human elements. And we talk about that inclusive leadership is effective leadership. He talks about a practice of fail forward Fridays, talks about how do we balance empathy with accountability, and just so much more. There's a lot of really good nuggets and richness and reminders that maybe you've forgotten about in this conversation. So take a listen, make sure to go to the show notes, get his books. You won't be disappointed. Andrew, I am really looking forward to this conversation on so many levels. So I just want to thank you for being here, and what I'm sure is going to be another one of my favorite geek out sessions that we have on the show.
Let's do it. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, let's do it. So obviously, we are, as a company, Salveo Partners, our whole purpose is to rehumanize workplaces so that people can bring their best selves to work and home each day. And I get asked a lot, well, what do you mean by rehumanize? Were they ever human? And we could go on a whole other topic about that. But what I love, the conversation we're going to have today that I think is so needed, because our world is so ugly in so many ways and so divided in so many ways, and so us versus them, and that trickles in to the workplace. And there's just so much of judging and, staying with people who are safe and familiar like us, whatever that is, or just not leaning to curiosity because it feels safer to just stay in the known. And you do such amazing work with inclusive leadership, with belonging. And I think that so many people want to tune out about that. But what I love right off the bat, mic drop, is that you say that inclusive leadership is effective leadership. So if anyone cares about being effective, we have to think about it differently and look at, no pun intended, but how comprehensive or inclusive the definition is of inclusive leadership. So we're going to get into all of that, but we got to learn a little bit more about you. Talk to me about why you're so passionate about this. You've written 2 amazing books, which everyone needs to go get. We're going to put them in the show notes. What got you into this space?
Well, number one, thank you for the opportunity to dive into today's content. Really excited about it. My story really begins with experiencing excellent leadership within an international retailer and just assuming that's what everyone's experience was like in corporate America. It was my first job out of undergrad. It was a high-level multi-unit leader role. And I just thought that's what was normal until I went to one of the worst divisions within the same company, and it felt like a completely different company. And I remember thinking, how can 2 divisions under the same company be so drastically different? And I realized it came down to culture and leadership. So from that moment forward, I was very intrigued with not only what culture was, but regardless of if you have a good culture, poor culture, if you just got the keys to this team, to this organization, and like, all right, we know we have a culture and should fix it, what would you do? And that really started the journey for me to answer that question, which culminated in me writing that first book, The Circle of Leadership.
I love and don't love that you had that experience. And I say that because I don't love that anyone has a crappy work experience, but you and I wouldn't have work to do if that wasn't the case. But I hope that someday we work ourselves out of a job. I mean, 100%. But I think that why I say I love that you had that experience is that we always say, and we're not the only ones, I can't take credit for this, but that culture is experienced at that local team level. That's where psychological safety lives. That's where performance lives. That's where the experience of the culture. So anyone that says like we have a good company culture,
what do you mean by that? Because you have many subcultures on every single team, and the leader plays a role of, what do I experience? To your point, you go in one area and it's like, wow, this is amazing. And you get to another area and leadership makes all the difference. We see it in terms of outcomes. We see it in terms of customer satisfaction score. I mean, every KPI, every metric that matters, you can correlate it back to the culture at that team. And it's usually the formal leader, because everyone can show up as a leader on that team, that has the biggest influence over that experience. So the fact that you were at such a young age, quite frankly, able to go, wow, how can this be? And I've heard other people like, I'm in this organization that has such a bad reputation, but I love the little bubble I'm in. Well, that's because you have a leader that likely takes a beating a lot and protects you from the crap around them or above them, right? And I've been in that spot too, where I've had to shelter my teams in the past and be that bubble, and you go home depleted, but you're like, man, I want to make sure that my team is rocking though while I try to navigate these waters. So just thank you for sharing that. So you had that experience, and so now you wrote your first book. So talk to me about, what were the lessons learned from that first one? We'll tap into the second one of like, okay, what did you learn about like, how do you tap into the best of your team? How do you create psychological safety? Like, what were some of those culture and leadership lessons that you took away that you've now been applying elsewhere?
Yeah, I think the first one was there tends to be this focus on process for leaders when they think about culture and making things better, processes and programs. And those have a part to play, but you have to back up and start with purpose. And that's one of the first things I realized, is that the best organizations had that shared purpose that kind of served as guiding principles for them in terms of decision making, which helped to shape the culture. And, I've read Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, that had a very profound impact too. And I was in my master's program at Michigan State. So I was learning kind of the business behind leadership while kind of playing out that real life experience. And I realized that you have to start with why. In the division that I was in Indiana, one of the things I realized is that we competed with ourselves, kind of had a slogan of excellence is our average. Like, the bar was high, from the beginning, and we moved accordingly, and that yielded good results. Whereas on the flip side, that culture was like, we're just kind of surviving. We just don't want to be kind of on the bad list type of energy, as opposed to almost speaking excellence into existence. So it all started with, why are we here? And why does that matter? And who does that matter to? And organizationally, it typically shows up as a vision, mission, instead of core values. But it could be anything that helps guide behavior.
I love that you went back to Simon Sinek and starting with why, because it is so critical. And let's be really practical about this, because so many people talk about the value of purpose. And I agree. And a lot of the work that we do with clients, and I'm sure you do as well, is it's fine if your organization has a purpose and values and if you've done the work, but there's so often a disconnect of, we have a great purpose, we have values, but we have not systematized and operationalized them into a lived experience on a daily basis. My friend Paul Epstein says, is it a bumper sticker or a 365 experience? And I love how he puts that, because we see this all the time with our groups of like, we'll do a culture survey with them and they're like, I don't see the leaders modeling these, or these values are not lived on a daily basis. Or on the flip side, we have organizations that, maybe they have a mission and values, but they don't really have a purpose, and purpose isn't the same as mission. And they really haven't done the work to truly refine and articulate where people can get behind it. But yet at the same time, you can still have pockets within there that do feel like we get our team purpose, et cetera. So talk to me about, how did you go from, it's there, to how do you actually hold it up? We use a lighthouse metaphor or compass, but like, how do you hold it up as a lighthouse on a regular, consistent basis in terms of how you lead your people?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, leaders have to model that behavior, right? People aren't going to be able to emulate something that doesn't exist. So I think that's the first kind of self-awareness piece leaders have to take is, are we modeling these values? And if we're not, be transparent about that and then commit to pivoting, right? So I think leading by example is critical. Also operationalizing it by thinking about, what are the normal touch points within someone's journey and working, and how do we incorporate those values or that purpose into those touch points? So for example, one-on-one meetings, every one-on-one, you should be talking about the purpose and how the work they're doing aligns with that purpose, right? That's a structural change, right? But from a calendar perspective, you're going to get on the calendar biweekly, weekly, and now you're talking about those things that truly matter regularly. And if you get everyone within the organization doing that, now the system in and of itself helps to keep that alive. Performance reviews as well. if you think about what are you trying to evaluate from a behavioral standpoint, you have to ask yourself, are the people in our organization walking in alignment with our existence and our values and what we say is important? And they should be incentivized based on that and held accountable based on that. So performance reviews become another kind of marker or place within their experience to make it more operationalized. And then what do you recognize? You think about town halls, think about monthly meetings, you think about annual retreats, right? Are we recognizing people who exemplify these values and doing so in front of the entire organization? So I would be thinking about how do we infuse that purpose and over communicate it and add it to the things that we're already doing.
I love all that because I'm like, yes, 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 yes. And you know what came up for me is you were talking about just even the one-on-one meetings. I was immediately brought to one of Pat Lencioni's incredible books that he does with the Table Group. But when he talks about remedying the 3 causes of job misery and how do you have engaged teams, one of those is irrelevance. And it is that I don't know how my work on a daily basis like matters. Like I do all this stuff, but like what's the point type of a thing. And what he talks about is as a leader, your job is to make sure that every single person within your span of care knows that, even this task that might seem mundane or this process or whatever, that they see that connective tissue of how it lays the groundwork or supports or feeds into a mission. So like take something like a nonprofit or take like healthcare or education. If you're in, I would call a behind the scenes department where you don't directly touch base with patients or the students. You're in HR, you're in finance, you're in IT, you're in risk, and you're not really having day-to-day interactions with your end customer, so to speak. It can be easy for those types of individuals or industries to feel disconnected from that purpose. But if you as the leader are like, no, because when you do this or you make this easier, it makes like the lives of the teachers easier. And so they can focus on the students rather than worrying about XYZ, or that they can focus on our mission or our patients. And so anyway, I just was like, yes, but it's so simple. And yet what happens? Either one-on-ones are avoided. Like Andrew, I can't even tell you how many conversations I've had with various clients lately where their frontline managers are like, their idea of a one-on-one is like checking in on tasks to do for that. Yeah, I meet with my people. And I'm like, no, like, do you actually check in as a human being and how are they doing and talking about goals? No, we got shit to do. I'm like, oh, and I'm like, how do you fill out performance reviews at the end of the year? Well, whatever. Like, so it is mind boggling to me how like so many people in leadership roles neglect the value that a one-on-one has for those engageable moments, for those connection moments as a human, but also to connect them to the purpose and also to catch things early. Like it is mind-boggling to me.
Yeah. And it's all controllable, right? When I think about why most people leave jobs or why most people are burnt out or disgruntled with jobs, it's a lack of growth, lack of opportunity to grow. Imagine a one-on-one weekly where the main thing you're talking about is how can I help you grow, right? And also as a leader, making sure that your work is in alignment with the growth of the organization. But if we're missing one-on-ones to begin with, you're missing out on that opportunity to have that impression weekly or biweekly that no, my leader supports my growth. We talk about it every time we meet. That's how important it is. The other thing I wanted to mention too is John O'Leary. He's a man who has written a bunch of books, motivational speaker. He had like almost 99% of his body burnt in a tragic fire as a child. And I remember hearing him talk about the story, and he talked about how one of the reasons he survived and made it was how the doctor really empowered everyone around them and made them feel like their roles were important. And he remembers even the people who would come in and clean the room. He remembers the doctor taking them to the side and saying, "Thank you so much for the work you do. Like, if we didn't have you to ensure this room was clean, John would not survive." And he was like a 9-year-old kid when this accident happened. So he was telling a story about how even the people who came in to clean took their job extremely serious because they knew, I'm not just cleaning, I'm keeping this little boy alive, right? And I think that's what leaders can do too, is figure out, how does the work that you do matter? Patrick Lencioni speaks about it a ton, but I think leaders overestimate or overlook, I should say, the ability of just tying back somebody's day-to-day jobs with a broader mission and purpose.
100%. And I love John O'Leary. And for people who are listening who might be more like, I don't know, academic or mastery minded, go look up the research on job crafting and look up Amy Resniewski's work, because they did work with hospital cleaning crews. And they actually looked at the difference of those who were highly engaged and felt like they were part of the care team, just like you were talking about with John's experience, and those that it was just a job. And the difference was those that were just a job was like, no, I'm just here to clean. It's a job. I'm collecting a paycheck. And you think about when you're going through the motions and you're not engaged or you're just like, move on, you don't give it the same level of care and attention. But to your point, like people who were in John's room, when they felt like, when they recognized like, no, because you know what, infection control and cleanliness, and you are just as critical, right? Like everybody that's part of that care team is critical and no one's better or less than you, just play a different role in the care of that patient. And when they saw themselves as a core part of the care team, they would go above and beyond. And even if you had patients who were unconscious, they would come in and talk to them and like fix their blankets and treat them like a human being versus I'm just here to wipe your floor. So I think, not that we're all like love our jobs, but it's like if you can create those opportunities where even jobs that might seem mundane or boring, that you can help people see, but this role, you have an opportunity to make a difference either in our purpose or in our process or in our customers. So everything you're saying, that is like, those are opportunities that anybody can do any day of the week. But if you're listening to a formal leadership role, we get so heads down and busy either in the day to day, or we get so busy on the processes and the strategy that we forget to connect the dots for people we assume they should know, and we shouldn't have to tell them more than once.
Yeah, no, we got to over communicate it for sure. And add it to the system, even just that human connection. When I have meetings with some of my contractors and people that I work with, what's your high and low? That's how we start the meeting. I know I need to do that because otherwise I know my tendency is to jump straight into business, right? But that human centered connection is critical. And starting off with that is how I like to do it. So couldn't agree more.
I love it. You start with your high and low. We borrow from Brene Brown because I'm one of her Dare to Lead facilitators, and we do a 2-word check-in always. How are you feeling? Right. And sometimes it's like caffeinated and tired, or it's, our Monday morning check-in, it's like raring to go or like behind, but ready, whatever. But it does, you connect on a human level, and then you see like, oh, like this person's on the struggle bus. We got to have a separate conversation when this huddle's over, or like my team's raring to go today. Yeah, let's like dive in. So I love that. I love that. So besides checking in, having the one-on-ones, deliberately connecting people that their work matters and they see that connective tissue, how else do you create this environment where you talked about excellence versus surviving, like where you can actually tap into the best of your team, that you can have this great environment, but also have excellence and an accountable team and workforce?
Yeah. So, let's say you have clarity in terms of the purpose of the organization, distilled it down to values, right? Whether you're changing those values or really just kind of revisiting them. Let's just say innovation, for example, is one of the core principles you want to move forward with, right? Well, now this influences the second P of the 3P framework I talked about in the first book. It's purpose. The second one is people, right? We have to get the right people that are going to align with what we're trying to accomplish. So if we're trying to cultivate a culture of innovation, we're trying to continue to push the limits and really create and be creative in general. How can you hire people who already value that? That's one of their core values. It's one of the things that they feel they need to do their best work, right? Now you can still have diversity within the workplace because people come from all different walks of life, but there's certain principles that unite everyone. And that's where I think the people comes into play. And once you get the right people on the bus, I mean, you're going to be able to get to where you need to get to just because you have the right people, right? And they add to the culture. So I would encourage leaders to think about not only what is that core purpose, but how does it relate to you personally? And how can you over communicate that with your team? Storytelling, that's a very powerful way to do it. I think it's a very underutilized tool within leadership, right? That helps people to visualize things, which can allow people to be on the same page with what a value and action may look like. So sharing stories where somebody was very innovative and that led to some type of result, and weaving that in with recognition. So even simple things like storytelling can be ways to not only make sure it's the right fit, but asking candidates, tell me about a time where you did X, Y, and Z. So spending more time with candidates and really ensuring there's value fit would be another thing I'd recommend.
I love that you brought that up because we are big proponents of storytelling, and with our clients, we actually, every time we bring like their leaders together, or we have one of our clients that we work a lot with their culture ambassadors, we always at some point with those workshops have them tell a recent story of their purpose and values in action. And sometimes people are like, right. And they, but then we encourage them to start like their staff meetings and their monthly meetings with that. But the whole point of that, so if you go back to Simon Sinek, the why from his process is created through storytelling, or it's elicited. It's not created, it exists. And it's telling stories of like, when have you been the most proud to work at this organization, right? Or like, when have you shown up as your best if you're doing it as an individual? And you start to see patterns and themes of the contribution you're making and the impact you're having, and the whys from those stories. And so the reason why we keep then bringing back to storytelling is it emotionally reconnects people back to what's good, right? Like we're not our best. We're not always living our purpose and values. We can try, but we're human, right? So it's like, we always say like your why or your purpose is who you are in your best day. And you're constantly trying to close the gap of like having more consistent days where you're living that, because we're humans. And the storytelling reminds us of, oh, when we do that, look at what's possible. Oh, I'm having a bad day, or I'm pissed off at my coworker or my boss, but oh, this is what's good about this company. And I think you're right. I think we underestimate the impact of storytelling, and people are like, oh, it's the same thing over and over. And I'm like, but look at the impact. Every time you tell a story, people's face lights up, they lean in, they let go of some of their judgment. And I think we don't do it enough because people feel like it's repetitive, or that they've done it and they're ready for the next shiny object. And it's like, it's a new story. It's just the same process, if you will.
Yeah. And people aren't really skilled in storytelling. I mean, people are typically not sitting down and in a class and learning the fundamentals of it. So I think one aspect of it is lack of awareness. The other aspect of it is some folks just aren't as skilled in being able to actually deliver it right, to make it succinct under 3 minutes and have an overarching point, all those different points. Ensure there's a climax that's relatable to what you're trying to accomplish. So I think that's part of it. But yeah, awareness, I think, is a big key. People don't understand how powerful stories can be.
100%. Well, and there's a stat that stories are 22 times more powerful or memorable than facts and figures alone, even though I just
Oh,
gave a
yeah.
stat. So there we go. Tell a story. But
Yes.
so you talk about the 3 Ps when it comes to culture. So we've got purpose, people. What is the third P?
So the third P is process. This is all about trying to simplify things. I've never met someone who said, I need more complexity in my life, right? A lot of us we're trying to streamline, automate, simplify, but a lot of times we fail to do that because we just kind of create confusion. So the reason we need to know our purpose first, and we have the right people on the team, is because it becomes easier to put processes in place that support what we're trying to accomplish and who we have on the bus. So one of the first things I talk about with that is psychological safety, right? Just people feeling safe to contribute and show up vulnerably, to share ideas, right? Without really feeling like they're going to be retaliated against. That's the first step, because that unlocks innovation. That unlocks, well, actually, this might be a bad idea, but let me just share. And then you end up sharing an idea that sparks something else that ends up being excellent. So I think when we talk about processes, how do we simplify things? And the first step is creating an environment of safety so we can get everything on the table, and then start to kind of have that back and forth banter around what are we going to put in place.
Well, and again, I'm really glad you brought that part up, because I think that some people, it's funny, we have some clients that don't want to call it psychological safety. I'm like, okay, what term do you want to call it? Like it is what it is, right? But I think that there can be this misnomer that psychological safety is about false harmony, or that I would say it's not about unicorn and rainbows. It's about people saying, hey, I messed up. It's about having the debate. It is about having that candor. In fact, it's expected, but they do it in a safe, respectful way, where we're not throwing one another under the bus or attacking one another, all of those types of things. And again, the leader sets the tone of whether or not that exists on their team. So what are some of the practical things that formal leaders listening can do that either create or nurture and reinforce a sense of psychological safety, so that people on the team are having those dialogues and speaking up in the way you just described?
Yeah, I think you got to model the way. So the first thing is find moments to be vulnerable. Team meetings, one-on-ones, maybe you create a separate call that's designated to be around reflections and just sharing transparently how you're doing, how you're feeling. That could be helpful. One things I did with my team was Fail Forward Fridays, right? And it was a 30-minute call every Friday where we just got on the call and we talked about how did we fail this week? And I would go first as the leader, right? And what ended up happening was it could be something simple as in, hey, just FYI, I deleted this folder. My bad. I actually meant to do X, Y, and Z just so make sure you don't blah, blah, blah. Oh, I could have done that myself. Thanks for telling me. So yeah, simple things like that to larger things that would come up where people would actually mention like, hey, I'm struggling with growing sales in this particular account or whatever it may be. And then it became a collaborative environment. And even more powerful than that is When someone recognizes that someone's willing to be vulnerable, it makes them feel more comfortable being vulnerable as well. So that's just another practical thing that I think can help. Fail Forward Fridays is what we call them. You can call it whatever you want.
We call them F Up Fridays.
Oh, there, I love it.
I can't take credit for it. I think it was Amy Edmondson, I don't know, a couple years ago had posted or shared something on LinkedIn. And I'm like, I am using that. And for at least the past 2 years, we do F Up Fridays.
I love it. I love it. And then I think as leaders do that, they'll find that they're more interested in finding the moments to be vulnerable because of the response they get from their team. And it could be simple. I remember I had a leader when I was working at Starbucks, and it was a Monday morning team meeting, and we were going around the horn kind of talking about how was your weekend? How's everyone doing? It was one of my first team meetings, after I joined Starbucks. And I remember my leader went and she was like, I'm just not feeling it this morning. Like, it was a tough weekend. I almost canceled today's meeting, honestly. So I'm kind of on the struggle bus. And I remember thinking that was the first team meeting in my career where the leader didn't come on and say something chipper and happy and positive and things are great. It was the first, like, no, it's a tough Monday for me. And it made me think, like, surely we have more than one tough Monday every 5 years, right? But we put on this front as if everything's okay. And now you're telling to your team, you can't show up as your authentic self. You can't afford to have a bad day, right? Well, that's not real. That's not being human centered, but the leader has to go first to demonstrate that it's okay to not have it all together.
It's so important that we create that space. And I love that leader modeled that for you and you got to see that in action again so early, because I was literally facilitating with a group of executives on Friday, and we were talking about, whether you're in a good spot or not. We were using like above and below the line, and there's a lot of different ways that people look at it. And one of the things that I hear a lot from people in a formal leadership role is they feel like, but I will take it to people who are parents. They can adopt this narrative as a parent as well, is feeling like somehow you're supposed to be oblivious to humanness and you're supposed to always be above the line or always. And it's like, you're a robot. Like, you're an AI created, I don't know, whatever the latest horror movie, doll is. Like, you are not a human being. But what we always say is that it's not about never having a bad day or being on the struggle bus or never going below the line. It is about how do you care for it when you're in that spot. You communicate to your team so that they don't make up a story about why you're quieter than normal or why you're, low energy or whatever it is. It's how you show up. They're going to make up a narrative and they're going to probably internalize that I do something is something wrong and create unnecessary drama because you didn't communicate that, hey, I'm not feeling well today. And you don't even have to get into why, just like I'm on the struggle bus today, please bear with me. And you might find that you think people are going to judge you, but usually they lean in with empathy and curiosity and support more so than anything. And when we do that, we give our team members permission to say, I'm struggling. And if day after day, they're struggling, which is more why you have to check in with people at least a little bit, then you have a different conversation of, hey, what's going on? I know this, you've been, down a lot lately or struggling a lot lately. And then that turns into a, different supportive type of conversation for sure.
Another benefit of that too is you end up making deposits into the relationships of your team, right? Because a lot of times one of the things I hear is this difficulty balancing empathy and accountability. And when you show up vulnerable like that over and over again, you're being empathetic, you're creating that culture of leaning in and being curious. Well, now when you need to give some feedback that may not be so pleasant to receive, they're able to better receive it because they know you have good intentions. They know you'll lean in when it's necessary and grant them grace. But we also have work to do, which should make it easier to deliver that without them thinking it's a personal attack. But a lot of times leaders haven't stored up enough in that emotional bank account of being empathetic. And now they want to drop the hammer. Well, wait a minute, right? When I knocked it out the park, you were kind of quiet. I fumbled this and all of a sudden, there's this iron shift. So that's another benefit of leading in that way. It makes it easier to hold folks accountable.
Yeah. How often do you hear from people? They're like, oh, I only hear when things go wrong. Like, I don't hear the good stuff. Or I think about, if anyone listening is familiar with Kim Scott's radical candor model, it's the intersection of caring personally and challenging directly. Caring personally, like if you've not invested, to your point, in that a relationship bank account, if you don't know that person on a human level, if you haven't shown that you care about them more than just their role on an org chart or getting a task done, then yeah, when you go to give them growth feedback, it's not going to come across as radical candor. It's going to come across as obnoxious aggression in the other quadrant, which is, I don't care about you, but I'm willing to challenge you. And if you think about, like, if you've ever been given feedback from someone who there's no context, they're not trying to make you better, they don't know you, we usually don't take that type of feedback well. We usually, the defenses, the blame, the screw you, whatever comes up, right? But when it's coming from someone who cares about you and has your best interest, it doesn't mean sometimes it's still not stinging or hard to hear that feedback, but you're going to take it in and receive it likely because of that relationship with that person, and you trust them, you care about them, you respect them. And so you're going to like at least sit with it versus automatically deflect and defend and all that crap that goes with it, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can receive it more as a gift.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also appreciate that you talked about the balancing empathy with accountability, because so often I think people think, well, if we have this psychologically safe, people are human and we're compassionate, that we don't care about results. But that the data doesn't support that. The data shows that the highest performing team get result, but they get results because they focus on that relationship and they focus on that humanness first.
Yeah. I mean, you think about how many folks come from toxic cultures, or maybe having poor leaders, or maybe they were vocal with their opinions and it didn't end so well. Like, we all carry around with us this corporate baggage. And I just feel like that psychological safety is step one, to be able to say, you can leave the baggage at the door. Like, it's safe here for you to let me know why this marketing plan is not going to work. Like, I need to hear this. This is why we spent so much time hiring you. We need a diversity of thought and perspectives and minimize our blind spots. So yeah, it's critically important.
Yeah. And with that, like sometimes you do have to mine for that. Like you have to explicitly say, no, I want to hear this. Please poke holes in this, because they might be coming from, to your point, an environment where that wasn't safe and they have the habits built in of, self-protect and withhold, et cetera. But I also have seen, like, if you go back to the cultures at that team level, I've seen where like maybe like you couldn't bring it to some team because there are people on another team that make it not a psychologically safe environment, but your leader can say, okay, no, bring it to me. Like you poke holes in this, whatever. And then I will be the conduit on your behalf or whatever, or on the behalf of our team. And I'll be the punching bag because I have a different level of relationship or whatever with that person. But it's saying to you, like, no, like, don't withhold, because otherwise we have dangerous silence. And like you go back to your innovation, you can't innovate if people are withholding. You can't innovate if people are silent.
Now, you're going to have a whole bunch of status quo. That's what it's going to be.
Yeah. So we got the 3 Ps of the framework for the culture. And I know that's your first book. And so then we've been talking about leadership, but let's talk about then what are some of the leadership practices where we do create this sense of belonging so people can contribute their best. That, again, going back to inclusive leadership is effective leadership. Talk to me more about what that looks like from your perspective and experience.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So, when I started to do kind of facilitation with folks specifically on inclusive leadership, where there's getting requests on people want to do a deep dive, I do an activity where it's like everyone go up to a whiteboard and write down what comes to mind when you think of inclusive leadership. Just whatever comes to mind, throw it on the board. And then we do one with just leadership in general. And I noticed that 95% of what was on both boards were similar. So we throw inclusive in front of it. We think that's something different. Well, no, leadership's getting the best out of your people, right? It's saying that I've been here, I know the way, and I'm trying to show you the way, so to speak. So that's where I started to realize inclusive leadership is just effective leadership, which means you cultivate an environment where people feel seen, heard, and valued. They feel understood. They feel like you value their feedback. You may not always align with what they're sharing, but you always want to hear it. And if you need to go in a different direction than something they suggest, they know why, which creates an environment where, well, I'm going to tell you my next idea because it was received well, even if it wasn't implemented. So asking for feedback, acting on the feedback becomes critically important. One of the things we see when we're working with clients is they'll do their engagement surveys, or they may do one of our surveys, right? Where we'll always encourage them to share talking points, right? Along the journey, to let folks know, hey, 2 months ago, you took the survey. Just so you know, we have a committee working on it. These are some of our preliminary goals. We'll share updates as more unfolds, but thanks for the feedback. So many people go crickets and it's just silent after we collect feedback. And that creates an environment where when that next survey rolls around, I might not even give you feedback. So now your survey landscape, right, the data you can pull from is much smaller because people don't feel like they're heard. So I would encourage leaders to always look to get feedback. All of it may not be good, but try to act on as much of it as possible. Those are practical things to create that safety within the workplace and make people feel like they belong.
Yeah. Well, and it's so funny because so much of what we're talking about is, I always say, like, when we're facilitating work, I'm like, most of this is not rocket science. Like, this is not new, but it's stuff that we forget about because we get busy, or we think we shouldn't have to do it, or we take it for granted, or whatever that I call it the head trash might be. And I think that best practices of surveys 101, that if you're not going to communicate the results and do something with the results, you're better off never surveying your people to begin with. And what we hear a lot when we're talking with a client of, does a survey make sense or not? Because it's not always appropriate or not always the best way for them to gather data and feedback for a variety of reasons. And when we're doing that, we'll say something, oh yeah, we put that in place, but we didn't get credit for it. And I'm like, well, did you explicitly connect the dots? You're assuming that they know that this change or this process or this change in coffee or whatever it was that you did, that they automatically know that came from their feedback in the survey. You need to be really overt about it. You gave us this feedback and we're doing this. Or like to your point, we have this committee, because they might be like, well, what happened? Why is nothing happening yet? Give it time. We have a task force, or we have a committee, or we're looking into it. And then the other thing is, you're right, not every idea is whether it's a good idea or a usable idea, or just it can't right now because there's different priorities. But I think that gets back to your 3 Ps. If you're clear about your purpose and you're clear about what the priorities and stuff are right now, and then even the process of how we go about gathering feedback and decisions, then it becomes easier to say, it's not that this isn't a fabulous idea. We've got XYZ constraints. We've got these capital expenditures. We've got this going on. We're going to put this in the backlog to relook at when we do the planning for next year or 2 years down the road. But being really clear about how you are prioritizing and that you heard it, or you know what, thank you for bringing forward that idea. It's just not feasible for us because of XYZ. It doesn't fit with our values. It doesn't fit with our goals. It doesn't fit with, but I appreciate that you brought it forward, right? Not just going into crickets or don't say that idea was stupid. I appreciate you bringing it forward, even if we can't use it, right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And I think handling those conversations, they're very sensitive conversations to have. And I think a lot of leaders don't handle them well. And one small tactic that can make it better is invite them in to collaborate, right? So it's like, hey, I really appreciate that idea you brought up during the team meeting. Here are some of the constraints or challenges I foresee, budgetal constraints, whatever it may be. What are your thoughts? Any way we can get creative to kind of get this? So now it's a situation where I followed up as a leader to what they shared. So they know I was listening. I took notes, creating the time to talk about it. I'm very transparent about there's some challenges that I think are going to prevent this from being able to get implemented. But what do you think? Now I'm regaining your commitment, your engagement to where we're on the same team. Now we feel like we're on the same team attacking this problem. And ultimately, if we can't work, then yes, you can deliver that feedback like you just so eloquently did. But the process is so critical to really shape the behavior and culture.
yeah, I love that. And I think you're right. It's such a simple thing, but I think either leaders have too much on their plate by design, or they're taking it on, because we do a lot of work where leaders are their own worst enemy, and they're their own demise. Like, okay, here we go, right? Because they're not delegating, or they're not prioritizing, or they're not pushing back for a variety of reasons. But it's recognizing that if you have a formal leadership role, from my perspective, your primary responsibilities are to care for, nurture, and grow and develop the people within your span of care, and be a steward of the company purpose, values, and where it's going in the culture, right? Like, if you think about what is my job as a leader, it's not pushing tasks and being a conductor. It is caring for the people and caring for the culture and like, if you do those 2 things and everything aligns up to that, like, what did I do today? What did I do this week? In my mind, I mean, there's a lot that goes into that, but those are like the focus areas, versus I have this to-do list a mile long, and it's stuff that I actually probably could delegate or use as an opportunity to grow and develop someone in my team. Might teach them to fish versus give them, a fish sandwich or whatever it is. But sometimes it's like, oh, I find value in being the go-to person, or I find value in being the one with the answers. And so then we get in our way of being able to do those, for whatever that's worth.
Absolutely. That gets into delegation and the host, emotional intelligence, self-awareness, a whole bunch of other topics, but you're spot on.
Yeah. So one of the things that we also have to talk about before we switch gears a little bit is, when you talk about effective leadership and you talk about creating this culture of belonging, talk to me about how you view leading with the platinum rule.
Oh yeah, the platinum rule. I love this. So, a lot of times we talk about the golden rule, treating people the way that we want to be treated, but how we want to be treated may be drastically different than how someone else wants to be treated. And that's where diversity comes into play. We're all different. And a lot of times as leaders, we don't even know how someone wants to be treated, how they prefer to be communicated with, right? So that's the golden rule. So the platinum rule is treat people the way that they want to be treated, which requires you to say, all right, what are their values? What are their interests? What are their pet peeves? What are their strengths? Like, if I can't rattle that off about somebody, it's going to be difficult for me to make decisions in terms of how they prefer to be treated. One example is I was leading this session and we were talking about core values. And there was a gentleman who said, stability is one of my core values. So like, well, tell me more. Why is that such a big core value? And he was in the military household growing up and moved like a ton of times before he graduated 18. So he came to not like change. So he's like, I'm staying in this house. I'm going to die in this house. Probably. I do not like change at all. Stability is very, very important to me. If you're his leader and you don't know that of all the values out there, stability is his number one, you're going to miss out on an opportunity to lead him most effectively and get the most out of him, right? So I think that's where the platinum rule comes in. I can't treat you the way you want to be treated if I don't know who you are. So let me get to know who you are. It makes everything easier, including this long to-do list of tasks.
I love that example you gave because a lot of the work that we do is actually leveling up leaders and teams to more effectively navigate change and disruption. So in that example, if I'm this person's leader and I know that he has a core value of stability, and I know first of all, we know the only constant in this world is change, but we've got some major organizational changes. Like we have a whole new system that he's going to have to learn or a whole new way of doing. I know that I'm going to have different conversations with him and to help move him through the discomfort, because change is going to be uncomfortable, but to not have it bump up against him so extreme, if you will, that he can't move through it. It's like, okay, I know you want stability. So let's talk about like what is known along the process or how long you're probably going to be uncomfortable, right? So that brings a little bit of stability to the discomfort. And if I don't know that versus if I have somebody who is a change maker and is like, bring it on, I can talk to them differently about it. So I just think that's such a critical example because if we don't know that, it's like I'm speaking English and you're speaking pick any other language. We're two ships passing in the night. It's not going to be effective, right?
And it also goes back to the importance of getting feedback to know what they want. I think about an example when I was, my first job as a people leader. I remember asking one of my store managers for advice and I was like, hey, just trying to get feedback on how I'm doing. What I could do better. And she said, I love how you always are positive, but sometimes I'd love if you were just a little bit more direct and just came in and let me know exactly what's wrong with the store and when it needs completed by. She was like, if you did that every time you visited, that would be great. And I said, that would help you get the best results. She said, absolutely. So I remember driving to my next manager's store thinking, if I took that same approach with this store manager I'm about to see, she'd break down crying before I left the office. And that was the moment where I realized, in my mind, I was like, well, I want to be a consistent leader, which means I approach everyone the same way. That was the day where I learned, nope, I have to show up completely differently for this store manager than the other store manager in order to get the best out of them to maximize their experience. But that doesn't happen unless we ask for that feedback and be willing to say, I'll adapt and adjust because I know stability is important to you, but it's not to her.
Yeah, well, if anyone who's listening who is familiar with Ken Blanchard, one of the gurus, right, of leader, they always talk about that the most effective leaders are flexible and adaptable in their style for that exact reason. So it doesn't mean I can still get the message across and be clear and direct, but you might need to receive it in a different way than a different person to have the same impact. Or you might be different in terms of what they call about your development level, in terms of your competence on a task or a goal, like you're still learning and maybe the other person is like, seasoned veteran type of thing. So you need more direction than that person does. Or you're really excited and love this part of that work or job. And so I don't need to be like a lot of rah, rah, rah. I can just go right to like what's getting in the way. But the other person over here, they're frustrated. They need a little bit of a, let's help with the mindset shift to work through it. So I think you're right. So often we blanket our leadership style as a one size fits all, but that's not. So I think that this is so important. And again, it goes back to if you aren't taking the time to meet with your people and you know these things about them or leverage a tool, we use various assessments to help shortcut it. Like, I know how to talk to you now, whether it's the Working Genius or YOS Discovery or something. There's a lot of them out there where you're like, I now know how to speak to you. But if you're not using something to help you understand the nuances of the people around you and the people within your span of care, then I don't know how you can be fully effective. I just don't. Like, you're just getting stuff done, but not effectively.
Absolutely.
So speaking of mindsets, one of the things that I am a total geek about is normalizing the messiness of being human. And we wrapped up a 5-year research study. We just took a 5-year chunk of data because you got to take a certain amount. It gave us a good data set looking at what are the most common areas where leaders get in their own way. And we've identified these core faulty programs that all leaders have. We call it head trash or whatnot. And I've learned no matter how much work someone does on themselves, no matter how successful they are, no matter how long they've been in whatever role they've had, we're human being first. And we all have the self-limiting narrative, that head trash, if you will, that gets in our way. So to help normalize the experience for everyone listening, Andrew, what is a self-limiting story that you still tell yourself sometimes? And when it shows up, how do you move beyond it so that you can still show up as a leader in your life and have the impact you want to have?
Excellent questions. When I think about a self-limiting story, I think about how I often talk about the difficulty of me tapping into my emotions. And, there's some validity in the fact that I grew up in a household where emotions weren't that prevalently talked about. So you just kind of had to guess, put two and two together, how someone was feeling. A lot of our dialogue was on what needs to get done or what we're thinking about, never really what we're feeling, or it's okay to unpack your feelings. So that is, I think, led to me just kind of chalking it up to, well, I'm just not good at emotions. I don't really I'm not super emotional like other folks, right? But that's not necessarily true. I just have more difficulty recognizing how I'm feeling and why I'm feeling that way. And it's not a habit that I was used to practicing in terms of discovering that. So even if it's little things like the emotion wheel, my therapist first put me onto this, and now I even have it as a mouse pad for those of you who are listening and can't see. But even just being able to expand my vocabulary, not just stopping at sad or angry or happy. It's like, no, I actually feel overwhelmed, or I actually feel overlooked, right? Those are different descriptors to help you unlock how am I truly feeling. So that's part of the work I'm doing to get better at that, is how am I feeling? I'm married to a woman who's very much in tune with her emotions, has a very robust vocabulary when it comes to emotions. So a lot of times she's helping me process that. And, a lot of journaling will help it as well. So therapy, just being self-aware and practicing what's uncomfortable and foreign, I think, can help with that.
I love that. And so many people, I mean, Brene Brown talked about how many you were raised in a household where, emotions were encouraged, and like most of us not, right? And so like her work, Mark Brackett, all the work out there of helping us identify in a more nuanced way our emotions is critical to us be able to process and move through them and regulate them and express them in a healthy way. So I love that you're doing that work, and I love that you're modeling the courageous vulnerability for others. So just thank you for that. That's amazing. All right. Are you ready for quick questions?
I'm ready.
All right. Fill in the blank. Living authentically is
Freedom and peace.
Ooh, nice. When the world is presenting an opening, but you don't feel like showing up as a leader, what do you do?
Examine why I feel that way. That'll unlock what needs to be done from there.
I like it. I like it. What is something that people would be surprised to know about you?
Oh, my parents opened up a hospital in Nigeria in response to people dying from illnesses and things they should not be dying from.
That is so cool.
Yeah, the Adeniyi Memorial Hospital.
Oh my God, I love that. That is so cool. Oh my God. Yay, go your parents. What is your favorite go-to movie?
I love American Sniper. It's a good movie if I'm in a war type of move. So that's the first one that comes to mind. Batman is it's one of my favorite movies too.
Which one? Like there's a gajillion Batman. Which one?
I'd say Batman Returns.
All right, good. What is your go-to song?
I would say The Story I'll Tell for going gospel with Maverick City. That's probably my go-to for encouragement and just hope.
Nice. I mean, I have a playlist, so I call it my Rosie survival list, but I'm gonna have to look that one up because I add to it all this time. So, what is something you can't live without?
Chapstick.
Like chapstick brand, or a specific brand of chapstick?
So it's Aquaphor chapstick is my favorite brand, but that is something I cannot live out. It'd just be a random pet peeve that'll annoy me and bother me. So simple. Obviously, my phone is another one, but just a small, more novel thing would probably be just chapstick.
Aquaphor lip balm. There you go. Unofficial endorsement for it right here. All right. What is something in your ordinary daily life that makes your heart happy?
Opening up that door and hearing "Daddy" and just the yelling and scream from the kids. I have a 7, 5, and 3-year-old boy, girl, boy. So sometimes, you can take that for granted. I still get surprised sometimes, opening up the door and then they're just yelling and screaming. But that warms my heart every time.
I love it. And just, fast forward 10 years, you're going to get grunts. But just so enjoy it right now. All right. What are you grateful for right now?
I'm grateful for the ability to do what I love to do every day. I'm truly living in days that I dreamed of and prayed for years ago. And sometimes you're in grind mode so much that you don't stop to think like, man, I would have given my right arm to be where I'm at right now. So I'm grateful for just the lifestyle and the work that I'm doing.
That's amazing. I love that for you. I love that for everyone you get to impact too. So, one final closing question. Andrew, if you could challenge leaders everywhere to practice this one behavior that would create more human workplaces and equip everyone to show up as a leader, what would that be?
Make it safe to fail, right? And however you want to take that or look at that, I think making it safe to fail from your team is going to be one of the things that will unlock the highest level of performance from those who report to you. So making it safe, make it okay to fail.
Love that mic drop moment. Well, this has been such a delight. I just want to thank you for the work you're doing. Everyone go out and get Andrew's books. We're going to link them in the show page. Just love everything that you're doing. Loved having this geek out session with you. Much, much gratitude.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
I'm Rosie Ward, and this is Show Up as a Leader. To learn more, head over to PeopleForwardNetwork.com and, of course, hit that follow button.